This review contains spoilers, so if you do not wish to be informed about the plot of this movie, you can skip ahead to this part of the video for the review summary. First rule of survival is never to split the party, which they throw right out the window, and Phoebe stumbles upon some camper dude, who upon closer inspection appears to be a creepy camper dude. Also, apparently this is not an island, since he offers to drive her back to town, which would not work had they been on an island. Just when things are about to get out of hand, Cole returns and frees her. The camper dude tries to follow, but then he trips because Cole tied his shoes! Ha! From before! Aren't you happy I made you remember the third scene now? Anyway, they steal this perv's car and then boom! A wild Sonia appears. But they're in a car, and Rick and Morty taught us that cars beat humans, so they run her over repeatedly and eventually decapitate her with the surfboard. Also, upon appearing, we get a cute little backstory that explains why she joined the cult. They give these for all the old characters, along with a throwback to something that was mentioned in the first movie, which was fun. I liked it. The rest of the crew arrives to find out Sonia failed. They hide under the car, which got stuck in a rock or something, and it cannot drive with one wheel off the ground. They then decide to split up and search for Cole. But hold on, they arrive almost immediately after she's killed, which they could easily have heard. They know she's dead. Melanie even kneeled to pick up the cookie, which would have given her direct line of sight to underneath the car. How is that not the first place they check? Where did they think they went in that short a time? The cult decides to split up in an old crew and a new crew and want to see who can find them first after some childish argument. Right as the old crew leaves, a sound is heard from the car because a snake had crawled up Cole's pants and they were holding it. This causes the new crew to check, as if the only unnatural object, which literally impaled their dead friend, is not something you'd immediately check anyway. The two guys approach the car and they first search inside before they start to check under it. But once again, Melanie only needs to duck down a little to be able to see them. They really shouldn't have been able to get away this easier. Here's some mushy dialogue about Phoebe's past.
That was all bullshit.
Okay, cool. And then we cut to the dads who are not going to do drugs, but they're totally gonna do drugs. They've also suddenly decided it's great that Cole and Melanie hang out, and forgot about the fact that they disappeared or something. And then we get what must be the weirdest cut to the next scene in this entire movie.
Going on tour?
So how do we know this cabin's gonna be empty?
What's the point of this? Was that supposed to be a clever line or something? Were they like, yeah, that's funny enough for him to leave on, and then realized he couldn't leave because it's in his fucking house, and then decided, yeah, just cut to the next shot. I didn't edit that transition. That's really how it's in the movie. Right before they cut to the scene, we saw they alerted Allison in a 10-second fragment after the aforementioned dialogue scene. It really looks like they just shoved the dad scene in last minute because they filmed it and couldn't really find a good place for it, but were so desperate to have it in that they made this sloppy cut. I honestly think this would have worked better if they had left the entire bong scene out. See? Works much better, doesn't it? Anyway, Phoebe's all snappy now even though they were all lovey-dovey a few moments ago. They encounter Allison and a few jump scares featuring exploding animals later. We also get to see Allison's backstory, once again referencing the first movie. Again, fun. The rest of the scene is kind of meh though, partially because she obviously does not know how to hold or use a gun. I guess I can see that being done on purpose, but it's not on par with the pinpoint accuracy she just shot the animals with. They try tricks similar to what Cole did in the first movie, and right when it seems to go well, something Phoebe says triggers her, and she should, but she misses and the bullet ricochets in her boob. They then jump down a cliff, and when Allison follows, she gets stuck and they decapitate her by pulling her legs. There are a few optical failures in the bit that follows, which are in odd contrast with the rest of the movie and its predecessor. First of all, they were right underneath her when they pulled her off, and there's blood dripping from the head, yet they were not covered in gore spatters. Directly after, a giant rock that was probably made in an Acme lab by the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote crushes her upper body. The blood spatters that emerge are shown to be shot in their direction, but nothing gets red. Not the ground, not the rocks, not Cole or Phoebe. It's obviously an animation of gratuity, but in the previous instances, they were at least consistent with the ketchup or paint or raspberry jelly, whatever they used for blood. But now it's just a CGI spray effect. Also, look at her legs. I'm pretty sure she's dead here, but apparently she repositioned her leg in between this shot and the next one. Max appears and also takes a swing at killing them. They defend themselves, hilariously utilizing Allison's body, pumps, and gun until eventually Cole kicks him in the balls, which gives them a window to escape. Apparently the whole body plus a huge boulder moved during this fight, but that's not even the worst visual error here. If you look closely, you can see that the leg, which was chopped off and used as a bludgeoning weapon earlier in this fight, is still attached here but without the shoe. They just took the shoe off the rag though and moved the whole sumbitch without caring even the slightest about continuity? Either that, or they just shot this in several takes and only decided their follow order afterwards. Enfin, they run to the docks and find a boat which they want to start, but they need a code. The owner is stabbed by Max, whose axe suddenly changed into a dagger. And then we get his backstory. That one was my favorite. I honestly think just that frame would have been funnier without the actual backstory scene, even though I like that too. I like how they consistently keep the shirtless for no reason gag, even in the backstory. Anyway, they need a code to start the boat, which they find through a reference to a song after which the boat was apparently named, which they know because they're the same kind of nerd. They take off, but Max jumps in the rubber boat attached to it and starts his pursuit. Eventually, they use the silly string to turn him into a human torch, but then he submerges himself and gets back up without a single burn, only to then be chopped into bits by the corkscrew propeller, resulting in unrealistic blood spatters. See, this is what I meant! There's no way there would be an eruption of blood like this, much less aimed at their face, but at least here the bloody overkill effect properly results in them getting drenched. It's the difference between comically over the top and straight up poorly made. Are you tired of having too many characters in your movie? Here's a cheap and easy trick to cut half your antagonists in just 1 minute. With new silly bang baddie remover, difficult bad guys are a thing of the past. Look how it dissolves these guys. Bang, and the dirtbags are gone. This is also where the ever so interesting storyline about the dads finally meets the main storyline. Due to lack of cell reception, Melanie uses a satellite phone to contact Archie. Not sure where that came from, as her outfit does not leave much space to store such a bulky phone in, but sure. She calls him to ask him to come pick them up, but she does not specify where she is beyond
at the lake.
Even assuming that the lake is a commonly known place there, everything they did so far was at the lake. And they're all over the place, so how is that supposed to help him find them? Also, this is kind of a weird plan since they have no idea where he is, but let's just see how it pans out. Phoebe and Cole are still on the run and share some more personal details. We also get very quick, short flashbacks from some event in her past involving a rabbit and a car. I hope you didn't have to blink or sneeze during this scene. You might have missed some. Meanwhile, Melanie and John got this boat out of fucking nowhere and start their search. Cole and Phoebe reach the place she was going to, which is some weird house atop some hill somewhere near the lake. They don't want to be found, but they casually leave the lights on, which is not a dead giveaway or anything. They should have just sent the boat away to make sure Melanie wouldn't be able to find them, as it's the only thing she can recognize them by, which surely would have bought them the necessary 3 hours. But there's still like 30 minutes of movie left, which would have been mighty boring if Melanie didn't have a lead. So here we are. Inside the house, there's a weird, unnecessary scene where he pees in her face, which I'm not gonna discuss any further. If you're curious, I'm afraid you'll just have to watch the whole thing yourself. After that, they hide in her rabbit hole, which is a throwback to the personal details bit where she mentioned she wanted to be Alice. Explains the stuffed rabbit and the rabbit hole and all that stuff. Surprise, Melanie and John found them and they're waiting for Archie. There's another scene of the dads in the car where Phyllis calls Archie and he says he found Cole. So he didn't even inform his wife that they found their son, which they were both looking for?
Are you guys high?
Oh, maybe that explains it. There's some arguing about that, but at least we learned that Melanie pinged their location, which is how they can find her, so there. Explanation provided. So then, in the rabbit hole, Phoebe and Cole get comfortable together and there is a choreographed dance number with all sorts of euphemisms for intercourse and defloration, so they probably totally banged. Then the Dadmobile arrives, and they're sent towards the house by Melanie. Back in the cabin, we finally get Phoebe's tragic backstory the movie has been hinting about all this time, which has something to do with the rabbit she found in the locker and the car crash we've seen flashes of. When they're about to get physical again, Archie interrupts them. The scene is stretched, and even though they already know they're down there, nobody attempts to enter. Lucky for them, there is a weapon safe in the rabbit's hole. Even more lucky for them, the combination was written on the back of the message Phoebe received along with the rabbit. Just another crazy coinkydink. Then, armed with a crossbow and a machete, Phoebe and Cole come out. They've also had time to paint their faces without anyone so much as attempting to go down there. Turns out really all they had to do was wait down there. But anyway, upon seeing John, we get his backstory too, and Cole fires his crossbow at him, but misses. John then grabs the sword on the wall, which was right there, but neither Cole nor Phoebe thought it would be a good idea to take it. Wants to take a swing, but accidentally snaps a cord that drops a chandelier-shaped bunch of antlers that pierce and kill him. Even seeing this guy attempt to attack his son doesn't make Archie realize that shit's fucked up, and Melanie enters, trying to convince him Cole has lost his marbles. We get a brief no you back and forth, after which Phoebe throws her machete at Melanie, which she catches like it's nothing. Even that apparently does not trigger either of the dads that something's off. Cole and Phoebe run out and Archie chases them. Melanie snaps and kills her dad, so I guess that's the last we see of him. Having learned nothing, Cole and Phoebe once again split up as Cole goes to argue with Archie. Really, all they had to do was keep running. Archie would follow, and if he didn't, you could have told him to. They hug, and Archie drugs Cole and takes him with him in his car. Then when they have to stop to recharge the car, Archie locks himself out of his car and triggers the alarm. What the fuck was he doing? Why would he lock the car and enable the alarm if he's just going to charge it? Did he not have any intention to get back in? If he needed Cole to give him the keys, he would not have been able to enter the car before he woke up anyway. Cole then takes the wheel and drives off, even though I'm pretty sure an electric car cannot drive away whilst still connected to its charger. Meanwhile, Melanie has set up Phoebe as bait to get Cole after beating her in a Mortal Kombat-style fight. Game over! And devoted as he is, he comes to save her. At the ritual site, all the loose ends will finally be tied together. We are reintroduced to Bee, who apparently knows Phoebe too and orchestrated the whole thing. Upon entering, she resummons all her demons that died this game.
A bargain forged in blood and shadow.
They take Cole's blood and mix it with Boom Booms to create a disgusting looking cocktail to complete the ritual. But after everyone but Bee drank from the chalice, it is revealed that it was all a trick. As we confirm that Cole and Phoebe banged, Cole is no longer innocent and the ritual is tainted. Seems like that dude from the start was right all along when he said,
"We just gotta get you laid."
While all trying to deal with this in their own way, they gruesomely fall apart and die. We then get the explanation we were waiting for. Bee was originally Phoebe's babysitter, and they got into a car crash with her parents. The parents died, Bee sustained head injuries, and Phoebe was lethally wounded. Bee sold her soul in order to save Phoebe's life, which explains why she became evil.
What would you give?
Look, anything.
She also explains Cole changed her during the events of the first movie, which caused her to want to end their pact. She planned the whole trip, including planting the rabbit with the safe combination in Phoebe's locker. Since she is the last demon, she drinks the tainted sacrifice as well and disappears too. Archie witnesses this and believes him now, and there was much rejoicing. I liked how the ending tied the story together. Many things from throughout the story suddenly made sense and were referenced in this scene. Maybe a bit cheesy, but I think that was well done. It still leaves a few unanswered questions. In the original, the ritual was completed using the book, which was burned at the end of the first movie. Did the rules of the ritual change, or was the book never needed? Its significance and that of its disappearance is still unexplained. At the end, after the first credits, there's a scene that implies the book has returned after Bee disappeared, so it was not forgotten in the making of this movie. I just wished it would have gotten back to that detail from the first movie. Also, we learned that Bee saved Phoebe's life by selling her soul. I assume part of her punishment was tempting others to sell their soul too by means of these blood pacts, which explains why she was evil. But in this finale, she basically renounced her evil side and broke her contract with the devil. Would that not mean that Phoebe should die since the trait was Bee's soul for her life? And finally, we learned that Bee planned for all of this to happen. Willing to buy that she would have foreseen that Cole and Phoebe would be into each other, which seems to be the main detail the movie itself goes into. But many other assumptions are odd ones, and something could have easily gone wrong that would have messed up the whole thing. How did she know Phoebe would come to their boat and ask for gas? Sure, she could have known her route, but not that of their boat. How did she know Cole would end up on her jet ski? For all she knew, Melanie's plan to get Cole's blood would have worked. Also, every bit of timing had to be exactly perfect for just this bit to work. How did she know they would both survive? One tiny misstep and either of them could have been killed. Quite a risky plan if you ask me. And this is all assuming she could have known Phoebe would follow the rabbit and that Cole would join the trip because of how well she knew them. Also, her plan involved betraying and killing Cole's best and arguably only friend. Not only is that something that sounds pretty evil for someone to just renounce their evil ways, but it also seems like an odd thing to do to the guy that allegedly made you a better person. So that was Killer Queen. Now let's see how it held up compared to the first movie. Story-wise, it did alright. It gave some depth to the original story and followed up nicely in the partially open ending of the original Babysitter. It did, however, bring up a lot of new questions. Many things that did not really matter in the original if it would have been a standalone movie became plot holes due to the way it transitioned to the sequel story. Also, the transition from intro to horror, which was set up similarly in the first movie, was much less of a surprise here because you knew from the start what would happen. The characters generally held up fine as well. I like that they stuck to the original cast for any of the recurring characters. The acting was never the movie's strong suit, and still isn't. Although here too, I must say the leads were fine. It was not bothersome here in most cases either. Similar to the first movie, a lot of the things that went on weren't all too serious, which takes away a large portion of the need for high quality, believable acting. Most of the characters kept their original style, which worked great for some, but less for others. The secondary lead, a new character, fit into the story reasonably well. I do however believe that they tried a little too hard to shroud her in mystery. For instance, they made her drop a lot of hints regarding her secretive personality, which felt forced and resulted in a couple of odd scenes or reactions that totally felt out of place. Aside from that, her performance was decent. For some characters, they changed the amount of screen time they got. This was not necessarily a problem in most cases, but this movie did have way too much of this guy and not enough of her. In writing and directing, the sequel suffered some losses when compared to its predecessor though. Let me start off by saying that I did like that they stuck to their parody-like movie style, even adding a few elements that went over well. I also liked that they changed the setting to avoid it becoming a one-on-one copy. But not everything worked equally well. There were significantly more flaws in this one. Whereas the original had very little errors that really bothered me, this one did. Flaws including a few very sloppy continuity issues, but also more scenes that make you think, why the fuck would they do this? To a point where, they probably goofed on purpose, just isn't going to cut it anymore. This may be because they tried to tell a more complex story here, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it makes it more difficult to get away with certain oversights. There were also several very odd scene transitions that made it feel like a bunch of scenes were edited in last minute without checking how it would affect the final product, primarily regarding many scenes involving the dads. Some of them felt like cutaways that were inserted at the wrong moment, like straight after they started a new scene. I also noticed that several of these scenes were cut off rather abruptly, and instead of using that to stress ongoing excitement or tension building, it generally transitioned to a calm night sky right before something was starting to happen, rather than in the middle of it, which you would expect when you cut a scene directly after the last word like that. Another thing that bothered me here was how many events felt like they were hastily worked through. The pacing of the original was much better because of this. The scenes where the classic slasher victim characters were chasing Cole, for instance, felt a bit rushed, as if they were in a hurry to finish this. Ironically, the moment where the film turns from rom-com to horror happens at nearly exactly the same timestamp in both movies, and part 2 is almost 15 minutes longer, yet for some reason, some of these slasher scenes felt like chores where they were like, let's get this over with. This is partially because there were more characters to deal with, and because they added more side information, as well as trying to add in a secondary plotline involving the fathers. It just felt like they tried to shove too many things into the hour and a half they had to make this thing. Horror-wise, it was also a step down from part 1. I didn't really mind the over-the-top gore bits they did in the previous one. In fact, I think it fit well with the style of the movie, but only in proper moderation. This really loses its touch when every single person is turned into a fountain of blood. I also feel like there was too much literal overkill here, where crushing someone or setting them on fire wasn't enough. It can be humorous, and it wasn't all that bad per se, but it was just too much. The more nuanced first version was better in this regard, even within its satirical subgenre. In terms of entertainment, it performed fine again. Not as well as the first one, but for a more of the same type of sequel, it was good enough to still be fun to watch. With all that in mind, was this a worthy successor to the surprisingly entertaining first part? I don't know if worthy successor is the right way to describe it, but it was alright. It wasn't nearly as good as the first one, but it still made for a successful movie night. Therefore, it definitely gets a sufficient rating, be it significantly lower than the original. I've also read that there's a plan to make a part 3. I'll probably end up watching that anyway, even if it's just so that I can review that one too, but I'm not nearly as hyped for it as I was for this one, because if this trend continues, that would not bode well for the next one.